I never expected my future mother-in-law to show up at my doorstep with 2 massive suitcases and a look that said she wasn't leaving anytime soon. But there she was, Margaret Sullivan, standing in the golden light of an autumn evening, her pearl necklace gleaming like armor. My name is Emily, and until that moment, I thought I had my life perfectly arranged. A beautiful 9-year-old daughter, a wonderful fiancé, and a cozy 3-bedroom house that was finally starting to feel like home. Then Margaret happened. "Emily, dear," she said, brushing past me into the entryway. Her Chanel perfume lingered in her wake, heavy and intrusive. "Jack didn't tell you I was coming? I'm having some work done on the house, and he insisted I stay with you both rather than at a hotel." I stood there, door handle still in my grip, watching as she surveyed our living room with the practiced eye of someone looking for dust on baseboards. Jack hadn't mentioned anything about his mother coming to stay. Not a word. "How long will the work take?" I managed to ask, closing the door slowly, as if delaying it might somehow make this situation less real. "Oh, indefinitely," Margaret replied, running a manicured finger along our coffee table. "These things are so unpredictable. Contractors, you know how they are." She paused, examining her fingertip. "You might want to invest in a better cleaning service, dear." From upstairs, I heard Chloe's bedroom door open. "Mom, who's here?" Before I could respond, Margaret's face transformed into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Is that my future granddaughter? Chloe, sweetheart, come give Grandma Margaret a hug." I watched my daughter descend the stairs, her expression uncertain. She'd only met Margaret twice before, at formal family dinners where Margaret had barely acknowledged her existence. Now she was Grandma Margaret? "Hi," Chloe said quietly, accepting a brief hug that left a lipstick mark on her cheek. She quickly retreated to my side, her hand finding mine. "Where's Jack?" Margaret asked, already heading toward the guest room as if she'd lived here for years. "I assumed he'd be home by now. He's teaching late today," I said, following her with Chloe in tow. "Usually doesn't get home until 7 on Thursdays." Margaret clicked her tongue. "Working so late? That's not like him at all. He always made it home for family dinner when he was younger." I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket, but couldn't check it with Margaret's eyes on me. "The guest room is this way," I said, gesturing down the hallway. "Though we weren't expecting company, so it might need—" "Oh, don't worry about that," Margaret interrupted, wheeling her suitcases into the room. "I brought my own sheets. Hotel-quality Egyptian cotton. I can't risk any allergic reactions to whatever detergent you use." My phone buzzed again. Margaret began unpacking, pulling out enough clothes to last a month. Each piece was methodically hung in the closet, her movements precise and deliberate, like she was establishing territory. "Mom," Chloe whispered, tugging at my sleeve. "Can I go back to my room?" I nodded, watching her retreat upstairs before finally checking my phone. 2 messages from Jack. "Mom's house flooded. She might need a place to stay for a few days. Sorry, meant to tell you earlier. In a faculty meeting. Call you soon." I looked back at Margaret, who was now arranging framed photos of Jack as a child on the guest room dresser. She caught my eye in the mirror's reflection and smiled that same hollow smile. "We're going to have such a wonderful time together, Emily. It'll be like we're already family." Something in her tone made my skin crawl. This wasn't just about a flooded house. I could feel it in my bones. Margaret Sullivan had a plan, and somehow, I knew my carefully built life was about to be turned upside down. It took exactly 3 days for Margaret to completely reorganize my kitchen. I stood in the doorway that morning, coffee cup frozen halfway to my lips, staring at the unfamiliar arrangement of my own space. Every cabinet had been rearranged, every drawer reorganized according to what she called proper kitchen logic. "Much better, isn't it?" Margaret's voice floated from behind me. "Now everything has its proper place. I noticed you had your spices mixed in with your baking supplies. That's no way to run a household, dear." I set my coffee down before I could throw it. "Where are Chloe's lunch containers?" "Oh, those plastic things?" Margaret wrinkled her nose. "I put them in the basement storage. Really, Emily, BPA-free or not, plastic is so common." I ordered some lovely glass containers that should arrive today. Before I could respond, Chloe came bounding down the stairs. "Mom, I can't find my blue sweater." "I took the liberty of doing some laundry," Margaret chimed in. That sweater was looking rather worn. "I've ordered her some new ones from Nordstrom. Much more suitable." Chloe looked at me, her eyes wide with concern. That sweater was her favorite, a gift from her father before he passed away. I felt my hands trembling as I gripped the counter. "Margaret, I appreciate your help, but..." Jack always said his ex-girlfriend Caroline was so organized. Margaret interrupted, busying herself with the coffee maker. She had such a natural talent for homemaking. Did he ever mention her to you? The kitchen suddenly felt too small. No, he hasn't. Oh, Margaret's surprise seemed rehearsed. They dated for 5 years, you know. Such a shame it didn't work out. Her family has such good breeding. Just then, Jack walked in, already dressed for work. He kissed my cheek, then froze, looking around the kitchen. What happened in here? Your mother reorganized, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. And apparently threw out some of our things. Not thrown out, dear. Simply relocated to more appropriate spaces, Margaret corrected, beaming at Jack. Remember how Caroline used to organize everything so beautifully in your old apartment? Jack's expression tightened. Mom, that was years ago. And Emily's system works perfectly fine for us. Of course it does, sweetheart, Margaret patted his cheek. I'm just trying to help Emily become more suitable for our family's standards. The word suitable hung in the air like poison. Chloe, who had been quietly watching this exchange, suddenly spoke up. I liked Mom's kitchen better before. And I want my sweater back. Margaret's smile didn't waver. Children should be seen and not heard, dear. Emily, you really should teach her proper manners. I watched Chloe's face fall, and something inside me snapped. Jack, can we talk? Privately? In our bedroom. I paced while Jack sat on the edge of our bed. This isn't working, I said. She's completely taking over our home, criticizing everything I do, and now she's hurting Chloe. She's just trying to help, Jack sighed. You know how she gets. She'll settle down soon. Will she? Because right now she's throwing out our things and talking about your ex-girlfriend like she's the one who should be here instead of me. Jack ran a hand through his hair. Emily, come on. That's not fair. Not fair. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. What's not fair is watching your mother systematically dismantle our life while you stand there letting it happen. From downstairs, we heard Margaret's voice. Chloe, darling, proper young ladies don't eat sugary cereals for breakfast. Let Grandma Margaret make you some steel-cut oats instead. Jack stood up, checking his watch. I have to get to class. We'll talk about this later, okay? As he headed for the door, I called after him. That sweater she took? It was from Chloe's father. Her dead father, Jack. He paused, hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. I'll talk to her about it tonight. But I knew he wouldn't. And as I listened to him say goodbye to his mother downstairs, heard her sugary sweet voice telling him to have a wonderful day, I realized something that chilled me to my core. This wasn't just about Margaret trying to help. This was about her trying to erase me completely. I never meant to follow Margaret that Tuesday afternoon. But when I saw her slipping into her Mercedes while supposedly resting with a migraine, something made me grab my keys. Maybe it was the way she'd been whispering on her phone all morning, or how she'd smiled too sweetly when telling me she couldn't possibly help with Chloe's school pickup. The cafe she pulled up to was one of those trendy places downtown, all exposed brick and overpriced lattes. I parked across the street feeling ridiculous, like I was playing at being a private investigator in some bad movie. Then I saw her, Caroline, Jack's ex-girlfriend, perfect as ever in her designer suit, walking through the cafe door. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Through the cafe window, I watched Margaret embrace Caroline like a long-lost daughter. They sat at a corner table, heads close together, Margaret's hand patting Caroline's arm with maternal affection she'd never once shown me. My phone buzzed. A text from Lisa. Coffee? I'm downtown and could use a friend. I typed back quickly. Perfect timing. Come to Brick and Mortar. But park around back. I'll explain when you get here. Lisa arrived 15 minutes later, sliding into my passenger seat. Okay, what's with the cloak and dagger routine? Oh. She followed my gaze to the window. Is that Jack's mother and his ex-girlfriend having what appears to be a very cozy lunch? Yes. Holy shit, Lisa whispered. How long have they been there? About 20 minutes. Long enough for Margaret to show Caroline what looks like wedding venues on her phone. Lisa's head snapped toward me. What? I can read Margaret's tablet screen from here. She's scrolling through the same venues she's been pushing Jack and me to consider. My voice sounded distant, even to myself. Except now she's showing them to his ex. Through the window, we watched Margaret pull something from her purse, a small velvet box. Caroline's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide with surprise. That's his grandmother's ring, I said quietly. The one Margaret's been keeping safe, until Jack and I set a date. Emily. Lisa's hand found mine. You need to tell Jack. Tell him what? That I followed his mother like a stalker? That I'm watching her have lunch with his ex? I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. He'll think I'm paranoid. Or worse, he'll defend her again. Margaret was speaking animatedly now, gesturing with her hands the way she did when she was excited about something. Caroline nodded, wiping what looked like tears from her eyes. My phone buzzed again. Jack, Mom says she's not feeling well. Could you check on her? Perfect timing, I muttered, showing Lisa the message. What are you going to do? I started my car. I'm going home, and when Margaret returns, I'm going to ask her about her miraculous recovery and lovely lunch date. Emily, wait. Lisa grabbed my arm. Don't confront her alone. Let me come with you. But I was already pulling away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, I saw Margaret and Caroline hugging goodbye, both smiling like they shared the world's best secret. At home, I waited in the kitchen. When Margaret walked in an hour later, she froze for just a second before recovering her composure. Oh, Emily dear. I was just out picking up some medicine for my headache. I set my phone on the counter, screen up, showing the photo I'd taken of her and Caroline. Interesting pharmacy you went to. The change in her expression was subtle but unmistakable, a flash of calculation behind her eyes. You followed me? You're trying to replace me with Caroline. Margaret's laugh was soft, almost pitying. Replace you? Oh, Emily. You can't replace something that was never truly established to begin with. The words hit like a physical blow, but I forced myself to hold her gaze. Does Jack know you're meeting his ex? Jack knows what he needs to know. Margaret moved closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. And what he needs to know is that there are better options out there. More suitable options. For both him and Chloe. I felt the blood drain from my face. Leave my daughter out of this. Your daughter needs a proper family, dear. And you? Well, you're just not it. She turned and glided out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, shaking with rage and fear. Because now I knew, this wasn't just about Jack anymore. This was about my entire family. That night, I packed 2 small suitcases while Chloe slept. My hands shook as I folded her favorite pajamas, the ones with unicorns that Margaret had deemed childish. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of Margaret's television downstairs, playing some old black and white movie I didn't recognize. My phone lit up with a text from Lisa. Guest room's ready whenever you need it. I stared at the message, unable to type a response. The thought of leaving made me feel simultaneously like a coward and a failure. But Margaret's words about Chloe kept echoing in my head. Your daughter needs a proper family. A soft knock at my bedroom door made me jump. Mom! Chloe stood there in her nightgown, looking smaller than her 9 years. Are we going somewhere? Before I could answer, Margaret's voice drifted up from the bottom of the stairs. Chloe, darling, is everything all right? I heard footsteps. I quickly pushed the suitcases under the bed. Everything's fine, Margaret, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Chloe just had a bad dream. Oh dear. Margaret's footsteps started up the stairs. Let Grandma Margaret help. I used to comfort Jack after his nightmares all the time. Chloe backed away from the door, pressing against me. I don't want her help, she whispered. Margaret appeared in the doorway, wrapped in an expensive silk robe. You know, Caroline is wonderful with children. She's a pediatric nurse now. Perhaps she could come visit? Give you a break, Emily. You look so tired lately. The casual cruelty of her suggestion made my chest tight. Chloe, honey, go back to bed. I'll be there in a minute. Once Chloe was gone, Margaret's sympathetic smile dropped. Running away in the middle of the night? How dramatic. And rather selfish, don't you think? How did you? Please. She waved dismissively at the partially visible suitcase under the bed. I've been watching you unravel for days. It's exactly what I expected. What you expected. Or what you planned. Margaret stepped closer, her perfume overwhelming in the small space. I simply created the conditions. You're the one proving you're not strong enough for this family. My phone buzzed again, Jack this time. Late faculty meeting. Don't wait up. Margaret glanced at my phone screen and smiled. Oh, that's right. Jack's having dinner with the dean tonight. Although, she paused, examining her manicured nails. I believe Caroline mentioned she might stop by the university to say hello. Pure coincidence, of course. The room spun slightly. You're orchestrating all of this. I'm protecting my son. And my granddaughter-to-be. Her voice hardened. Chloe deserves stability. A mother who doesn't run away when things get difficult. Someone like Caroline. Get out. My voice was barely a whisper. Think carefully about your next move, Emily. If you leave tonight, you prove everything I've told Jack about you. But if you stay, she smiled that hollow smile again. Well, we'll see how long you last. After she left, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the half-hidden suitcases. My phone buzzed one more time, a photo from an unknown number. It showed Jack and Caroline at a restaurant, sitting close together, her hand on his arm. Margaret's message followed. He deserves better. They both do. I deleted the photo with trembling fingers and walked to Chloe's room. She was awake, clutching her stuffed rabbit, another item Margaret had tried to dispose of. "Mom!" Her voice was small in the darkness. "Are we leaving?" I sat on the edge of her bed, running my fingers through her hair. "No, sweetheart. We're not leaving. But Margaret is not going to win." I surprised myself with the firmness in my voice. "This is our home, our family, and I'm done letting her make us feel like we don't belong." Chloe sat up and hugged me tight. "Promise, promise." I held her close, my mind already forming a plan. Margaret wanted to play games? Fine. But she'd forgotten something crucial. I had nothing left to lose, and everything to protect. Tomorrow, I would stop reacting and start fighting back. And Margaret Sullivan was about to learn that sometimes the people you underestimate are the most dangerous of all. The family dinner was my idea, a last desperate attempt to clear the air. I spent hours preparing Jack's favorite lasagna, setting the table with the good china Margaret had gifted us last Christmas. Even Chloe helped, carefully arranging flowers in the centerpiece while shooting nervous glances toward the kitchen where Margaret hovered. "The sauce seems a bit acidic," Margaret commented, dipping a silver spoon into the pot. Caroline always used her grandmother's recipe. Such a lovely, traditional approach. I gripped the counter, counting breaths. "The sauce is fine, Margaret." The doorbell rang. Jack walked in with a bottle of wine, but my relief at seeing him vanished when I noticed who followed. Caroline. Perfect as ever in a black cocktail dress. "Hope you don't mind," Jack said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Mom mentioned she'd invited Caroline, said it would be nice to catch up." Margaret's smile was triumphant. "More the merrier, right, Emily?" Chloe pressed against my side. "Mom." "It's okay, sweetie," I whispered, though nothing felt okay. "Why don't you go wash up for dinner?" The meal started quietly enough. Caroline chatted about her pediatric practice while Margaret beamed. Jack seemed fascinated by his plate. I pushed food around, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. "Emily," Margaret said, setting down her wine glass. "Didn't you say you were a translator before? What happened with that career?" "I still am a translator." "Oh!" Margaret's eyebrows rose. "I thought you'd given it up." "After the incident." The room went still. Jack looked up sharply. "What incident?" "It's nothing," I said quickly, but Margaret was already pulling out her phone. "Strange, because I was doing some research." She scrolled through something. "There was quite the scandal at your old publishing house, wasn't there? Something about manipulated translations? Changed endings?" My hands began to shake. "That's not what happened. The article says differently." Margaret's voice dripped false concern. "Jack, dear, did you know about this? About how Emily lost her position after altering authors' works without permission." "I never altered anything," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. "There was a misunderstanding with one manuscript." 3 manuscripts, Margaret corrected, according to this article, and a lawsuit that was settled out of court. She turned to Jack. "I'm only bringing this up because I care about you, sweetheart. About your reputation at the university. These things have a way of reflecting poorly on." "Stop." Jack's voice was quiet but firm. "That's enough, Mom." Margaret blinked innocently. "I'm only trying to protect." I said stop. Jack stood up, his chair scraping back. "Emily, is this why you switched to freelance work?" I nodded, unable to speak. The truth was Messier, a vengeful senior editor, translations that were actually correct but politically inconvenient, a company that needed a scapegoat. But explaining felt impossible under Margaret's triumphant gaze. "Well," Caroline spoke up, "integrity is so important in academia. If there are questions about Emily's professional ethics." "There aren't." Jack's response was immediate. He moved to stand behind my chair, his hand finding my shoulder. "And if there were, they'd be between Emily and me. Not my mother, not my ex-girlfriend, and certainly not the dinner table." Margaret's face hardened. "Jack, be reasonable. With your tenure review coming up, I think it's time for everyone to leave." Jack's voice left no room for argument. Caroline stood first, gathering her purse. This was enlightening. "Mom," Jack said quietly. "You too." Margaret rose slowly, her expression dangerous. "You're choosing her? After what I've just revealed?" "I'm choosing my family." Jack squeezed my shoulder. "All of it, including you if you can accept that. But this ends now." After they left, I sat frozen, waiting for questions, accusations, anything. Instead, Jack knelt beside my chair and took my hands in his. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it was humiliating," I whispered. "And finished. Until your mother decided to weaponize it." From the doorway, Chloe's small voice. "Is Grandma Margaret going to make us leave?" Jack pulled her into a hug. "No, sweetheart. If anyone's leaving, it's Grandma Margaret." But looking at his face, I knew this wasn't over. Margaret had played her trump card, and even though it hadn't worked as she'd planned, she wouldn't stop here. This was just the beginning. The family cabin was supposed to be our escape. Jack suggested the weekend getaway after the dinner disaster, a chance to reset and reconnect. What I hadn't expected was Margaret announcing she'd join us, claiming the cabin had always been a Sullivan family tradition. Now I stood in the rustic kitchen, watching through the window as Margaret walked with Jack along the lake shore. Her hand on his arm, just like Caroline's had been at that restaurant. They were too far away to hear, but Margaret's body language told the story. The concerned tilt of her head, the maternal touch. The way she kept stopping to make her points more emphatic. "Mom!" Chloe's voice made me jump. "Grandma Margaret said my room used to be Dad's when he was little. She said everything here belongs to their family." I gripped the counter. "This isn't about belonging, sweetie. It's about..." The cabin door opened, and Jack walked in alone. His expression was unreadable. "Chloe," he said quietly, "could you go unpack your books? I need to talk to your mom." After she left, Jack paced the small living room. "Mom's been talking to the tenure committee." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What?" "Apparently, she's friends with the chairman's wife. She told them about your professional history. Suggested it might reflect poorly on the department. She's trying to destroy your career now." My voice cracked. "Because of me?" "She says she's protecting me." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "She's arranged a meeting with the committee next week. Wants me to reconsider certain life choices before then." The implication hung heavy in the air. Outside, I could see Margaret watching through the window, her face a mask of maternal concern. "I won't let her manipulate you like this," I said, moving toward the door. But Jack caught my arm. "Emily, wait. There's more." He looked pained. "She's filed for partial custody of Chloe." The world stopped. "What?" "She's claiming she has concerns about your stability. The publishing scandal, the erratic behavior she's documented since moving in. She has friends in family court too." I yanked away from him. "And you're just telling me this now?" "I only found out during our walk." "Emily, I swear." The cabin door opened again and Margaret glided in. "Having a productive chat?" "I thought it best to give you privacy while discussing options." "Options?" I turned to face her. "You mean your ultimatum?" "Oh, Emily." She sighed, the picture of sympathy. "I'm only thinking of what's best for everyone. Jack's career, Chloe's stability. Surely you can see this situation isn't sustainable." "Mom, stop," Jack started, but Margaret held up a hand. "Sweetheart, I know this is difficult. But sometimes love means making hard choices. Caroline's already expressed interest in resuming your relationship, and she'd be wonderful with Chloe. Get out." My voice was barely a whisper. "Excuse me? Get out." Each word felt like glass in my throat. "Before I show you exactly how unstable I can be." Margaret's mask slipped for just a moment, showing something ugly underneath. Then she smiled. "I'll give you both some time to discuss things rationally. Jack, remember, the committee meets Tuesday." After she left, Jack tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. "Emily, please. Were you ever going to tell me about Caroline?" His silence was answer enough. "Mom." Chloe stood on the stairs, clutching her book. "Are we leaving?" The same question from that night I'd packed our bags, but now with a different weight. Margaret had orchestrated everything perfectly. My past, Jack's career, custody threats, even a replacement family waiting in the wings. One wrong move and I could lose everything. I looked at my daughter, then at Jack, then through the window where Margaret stood by the lake, phone in hand, probably calling her lawyer friends right now. "No, sweetheart," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "We're not leaving." Because that's what Margaret wanted, for me to run, to prove her right, to give her the ammunition she needed. But if she wanted a war, she'd get one. I just had to figure out how to fight back without losing everything in the process. I just wasn't sure that was possible anymore. The scream woke me just after midnight. I bolted upright, heart pounding, before recognizing Margaret's voice from downstairs. By the time I reached the cabin's living room, Jack was already there, supporting his mother as she clutched her chest. "It's nothing," Margaret gasped, though her face was gray. "Just..." Indigestion. This isn't indigestion, I said, reaching for my phone. She needs a hospital. No. Margaret tried to stand but stumbled. No hospitals. I just need. Her legs gave out. Jack caught her before she hit the floor, real fear replacing his usual uncertainty. Mom! The nearest hospital is an hour away, I said, already dialing. But there's a clinic in town. 15 minutes. Margaret is found mean, desperate now. Please, I can't. My medical records. Something in her voice made me pause. What about them? The custody filing, she whispered. If they know. Jack looked between us, confused. Know what? Mom. I knelt beside her, close enough to see the sheen of sweat on her forehead. You're not really filing for custody, are you? The threats, the lawyers, it was all bluff. She closed her eyes, pain etching deeper lines in her face. I had to protect Jack. Had to keep my family. By destroying mine? The words came out sharper than I intended. You don't understand, Margaret grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. When Jack's father left, when he chose his new family, I promised myself never again. Never let anyone take what's mine. Mom, Jack's voice cracked. Dad left because of you. Not because of his new job. Margaret's laugh turned into a sob. He had such a perfect replacement family waiting. Just like you do now with Caroline. I couldn't lose you too. I stood up, decision made. Jack, get her to the car. Now. The drive to the clinic was tense, Margaret drifting in and out of consciousness in the back seat. Jack kept looking back, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. She'll be okay, I said quietly. Will she? Any of this? He glanced at me. I should have seen it. Should have stopped her. You're not responsible for her choices. In the rearview mirror, I saw Margaret's eyes open, focusing on me. Why are you helping me? After everything. Because that's what family does, I said, turning to face her. Real family. Not the perfect image you're trying to preserve. Messy, complicated, sometimes broken, but we show up. We help. Even when it's hard. Even when someone doesn't deserve it? Her voice was barely a whisper. Especially then. The clinic's lights appeared ahead, harsh against the dark country road. As Jack pulled into the parking lot, Margaret reached forward, touching my shoulder. The custody papers, she said. They're blank. I never filed them. I thought if I scared you enough. I finished for her. Like he did. Her hand dropped. But you stayed. You fought. You're stronger than I was. Jack helped her out of the car while I spoke to the clinic staff. As they wheeled her away for tests, she caught my hand one last time. Emily? Her grip was weaker now, but her eyes were clear. I'm sorry. For everything. I was so afraid of losing my family that I almost destroyed it instead. Get better first, I said. Then we'll talk about family. Later, sitting in the waiting room with Jack, I watched dawn break through the window. The doctor had said Margaret would be fine, anxiety attack combined with exhaustion, not the heart attack we'd feared. She'd need rest, care, and probably therapy. What happens now? Jack asked, his head in his hands. I thought about Margaret's confession, about fear and family, and the lengths we go to protect what we love. Now we start over. All of us. But this time with truth instead of perfect appearances. And if she can't change, then we'll deal with that too. I took his hand. Together. As a real family. Because sometimes the strongest families aren't the ones that look perfect from the outside, but the ones that survive being broken and choose to rebuild, scars and all. 3 months after the cabin incident, I stood in my kitchen watching Margaret teach Chloe how to make her grandmother's chocolate chip cookies. Not the perfect, store-bought ones she'd initially insisted on, but the messy, homemade kind that left flour on their cheeks and butter under their fingernails. The secret, Margaret said, her voice softer these days, is not measuring too precisely. Sometimes the best things come from letting go of control. I caught her eye across the counter, recognizing the deeper meaning in her words. She'd moved back to her own house 2 months ago, after completing her therapy program. The renovation story had been just that, a story. But now her house was actually under construction, being transformed from a pristine showcase into something more livable, more real. Jack came home early, dropping his briefcase by the door. Smells like heaven in here. Dad! Chloe ran to hug him, leaving flowery handprints on his suit. Grandma Margaret's teaching me the family recipe. I watched Jack's face soften at the word family. The tenure committee had approved his position last week. Despite, or perhaps because of, Margaret's final letter to them, explaining her previous actions and withdrawing her concerns. Emily, Margaret's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Could you help me with something in the living room? I followed her, noting how she no longer tried to dominate spaces as she moved through them. In the living room, she pulled out a familiar blue sweater from her bag, Chloe's favorite, the one from her father. I had it professionally cleaned and repaired, she said quietly. I know it doesn't make up for taking it, but it's a start. I finished, taking the sweater. The fabric was soft, the worn edges carefully mended. I spoke with Caroline yesterday, Margaret continued, her hands twisting together. I apologized for involving her in everything. She's engaged now to someone else. She's happy. Are you okay with that? Margaret smiled, a real one this time. I'm learning to be. My therapist says it's about accepting what we can't control and cherishing what we have instead of fearing what we might lose. From the kitchen, we heard Chloe giggle, followed by Jack's deep laugh. Something crashed, probably a mixing bowl, and instead of rushing to fix it, Margaret stayed where she was. They're fine, I said, watching her resist the urge to intervene. Yes, she agreed, then hesitated. Emily, about the wedding. I know you and Jack are planning for spring, and I want you to know I'll respect whatever boundaries you set. If you'd rather I wasn't involved. Actually, I interrupted, we could use help with the flowers. I hear you know something about traditional arrangements. Her eyes welled up, but she blinked the tears away quickly. I'd like that. Very much. Another crash from the kitchen, followed by more laughter. This time, we both walked back together, finding Jack and Chloe covered in flour, trying to clean up their mess while simultaneously making it worse. Need help? I asked, already knowing the answer. Always, Jack replied, pulling me into the chaos. Margaret hung back for a moment, watching us. I remembered doing the same thing months ago, feeling like an outsider in my own home. But families, I'd learned, weren't about perfect appearances or controlling outcomes. They were about making room for change, for growth, for forgiveness, even when it's messy. Grandma Margaret? Chloe held out a flour-covered hand. Help us fix it. Margaret stepped forward, rolling up her expensive sleeves. Yes, dear. Let's fix it together. Later that night, after Margaret left and Chloe was in bed, I found a note tucked into the pocket of the blue sweater. In Margaret's elegant handwriting, it read, "Sometimes the families we fight hardest to protect are the ones we hurt the most. Thank you for showing me a better way." I placed the note in my wedding planning folder, next to the venue details and flower arrangements. Not as a reminder of what had happened, but as proof of what could change when we choose love over fear, messy reality over perfect illusions. Because in the end, that's what family really means. Not the family we imagine, but the family we build, one imperfect moment at a time.
My name's Sarah, and I've got a story to tell you. It all started when I was just a little kid, maybe 5 or 6. That's when my parents split up. Dad, his name's Mark, he couldn't take it anymore. Mom, Linda, she'd been riding his ass for years about not making enough money. Always putting him down, making him feel like shit. I remember this one time, Dad came home excited about a promotion at work. He was grinning from ear to ear, proud of himself for once. Mom just looked at him and said, "That's it? I thought you'd finally gotten a real job." The light just went out of his eyes. It was like watching someone deflate. So yeah, Dad left. Can't say I blame him now, looking back. But at the time, it felt like my whole world was falling apart. Mom, though? She saw an opportunity. Mom figured out pretty quick that being a poor, abandoned single mother could get her a lot of perks. At work, she'd lay it on thick with her boss. "I'm so sorry I'm late again, Mr. Johnson," she'd sniffle. Sarah was sick, and with no one to help. Mr. Johnson would pat her hand and tell her not to worry. Meanwhile, I was perfectly fine, spending the morning watching cartoons while Mom did her hair and makeup. Family gatherings were the worst. Mom would hold court, dramatically recounting how Dad had left us with nothing. I'd squirm in my seat, uncomfortable with the lie, but not daring to speak up. Even at that age, I knew better than to contradict Mom in public. What no one knew was that Dad was sending money every month. Child support, he called it. Mom would scoff when the checks came in. "Look at this, Sarah," she'd say, waving the paper in my face. "Your father thinks this pittance is enough to raise a child on." Pathetic. I didn't know how much it was supposed to be. All I knew was that it made Mom angry, and when Mom was angry, life got harder for me. As the years went by, I started noticing things. Like how Mom would look at me sometimes, her eyes narrowing like she was seeing something she didn't like. Later, I realized it was because I looked too much like Dad. It brought back memories for her, and not the good kind. But she kept me around. I was useful, you see. The picture of the struggling single mom and her brave little girl was too good to pass up. It got her sympathy, special treatment, even some government assistance. Then, when I was about 10, everything changed again. Mom met Richard. Rich, successful Richard. Suddenly, being a struggling single mom wasn't so appealing anymore. No, now she had a new image to cultivate. The devoted wife of a prominent businessman. And I didn't fit into that picture so well. It started small at first. Mom would forget to wash my clothes, leaving me with nothing clean to wear to school. I'd show up in wrinkled, stained outfits, my face burning with shame as the other kids whispered and pointed. Then came the food situation. Mom would cook these elaborate meals for her and Richard, filling the house with mouth-watering smells. But when I'd come to the table, she'd frown. "Oh, Sarah, I'm sorry. I didn't make enough for 3. Why don't you make yourself a sandwich?" I'd retreat to the kitchen, my stomach growling as I slapped together a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Through the door, I could hear Mom and Richard laughing, the clink of wine glasses a stark contrast to my meager meal. The worst was when she started messing with my schoolwork. I'd spend hours on an assignment, only to have it disappear the next morning. I'd show up to class empty-handed, stammering excuses to my teacher. My grades started to slip, and the teachers began giving me concerned looks. Through it all, Richard remained oblivious. He was always buried in his work, and when he wasn't, his attention was solely on Mom. She'd simper and coo at him, playing the part of the adoring wife. "Richard, darling, you work so hard," she'd say, massaging his shoulders. "You deserve to relax." He'd smile up at her, completely under her spell. "What would I do without you, Linda?" Things got even worse when Mom announced she was pregnant. Richard was over the moon, and Mom milked it for all it was worth. "The doctor says I need plenty of rest," she'd tell me, lounging on the couch. "Be a dear and tidy up the house, won't you?" I'd spend my afternoons cleaning while Mom napped or chatted with her friends on the phone. When Richard came home, she'd struggle to her feet, one hand on her barely there bump. "Oh, honey, I'm so tired," she'd sigh. Growing a baby is hard work. Richard would rush to her side, all concern. "Sit down, my love. Sarah, bring your mother some water." As the months wore on, I felt more and more isolated. At school, I withdrew from my friends, too embarrassed to invite them over. At home, I was little more than a servant, expected to cater to Mom's every whim. One night, as I lay in bed listening to Mom and Richard cooing over nursery designs, something in me snapped. I couldn't do this anymore. I needed out. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never dared to do before. I called my dad and told him everything. The neglect, the mind games, the constant feeling of being unwanted. Dad listened in silence, only the sound of his breathing telling me he was still there. When I finally ran out of words, there was a long pause. "Pack your bags," he said at last, his voice hard. "I'm coming to get you." The next morning, I woke up early, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. I had already packed my bags the night before, unable to sleep from anticipation. As I dragged my suitcase down the stairs, I heard Mom's voice from the kitchen. "Going somewhere, Sarah?" I froze, expecting a confrontation. But when I turned, I saw Mom leaning against the doorframe, a strange smile on her face. She looked relieved. "I'm going to live with Dad," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. To my shock, Mom's smile widened. "Well, it's about time," she said, her tone almost cheerful. "Richard and I could use the extra space for the baby." Her words hit me like a slap, but before I could respond, I heard a car horn outside. Dad was here. Mom walked me to the door, that unsettling smile still in place. "Have a good life, Sarah," she said, practically shooing me out. As I walked to Dad's car, I glanced back. Mom stood in the doorway, looking frankly joyful as she waved goodbye. It was the happiest I'd seen her in years, and it was because I was leaving. Dad's apartment was small, but it felt more like home than anywhere I'd lived in years. However, we wouldn't be there for long. Over the next few months, I watched in awe as Dad's business took off like a rocket. It seemed like every week brought news of a new contract, a big client, or an expansion. Within a year, we were house hunting in the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. The house we ended up buying was nothing short of spectacular. 3 stories of modern architecture, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a backyard that looked like something out of a magazine. My room was bigger than our entire old apartment. While Dad worked long hours managing his now booming business, I threw myself into making our big house a home. I learned to cook gourmet meals, filling the place with amazing smells. I kept things tidy, managed the household staff, even started a vegetable garden in our spacious backyard. As the months passed, I watched Dad's hard work continue to pay off. His business kept growing, and with it, our lifestyle improved even more. I transferred to the most prestigious private school in the city. On my 16th birthday, Dad surprised me with a car. Not just any car, but a brand new luxury SUV. "Now you can drive yourself to school in style," he said, tossing me the keys. "And maybe run some errands for your old man?" As I settled into my new life, I thought about Mom less and less. She never tried to contact me, and I made no effort to reach out to her or any of my maternal relatives. The wounds were still too raw, the memories too painful. Instead, I focused on my studies. Years passed, and before I knew it, I was graduating college with honors. As I stood on that stage, accepting my diploma, I searched the crowd for Dad's face. He was there, beaming with pride, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. This was what it felt like to be loved, truly and unconditionally. After the ceremony, Dad pulled me aside. "I've got something for you," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. He handed me a small box. Inside was a key. "It's for your new apartment. In the city center. Consider it a graduation gift." Tears welled up in my eyes as I hugged him fiercely. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." It had been a few years since I graduated from college. My career was taking off, I had a beautiful apartment in the city, and life was good. Dad and I had settled into a comfortable routine of weekly dinners and long phone calls. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't. The news came like a thunderbolt out of a clear sky. Dad was sick. Cancer. Advanced. The doctor's words blurred together in a haze of medical jargon, but the gist was clear: it was bad. From that moment on, my world narrowed to a singular focus: saving Dad. I took a leave of absence from work, moving back into his house to take care of him. Every waking moment was devoted to his care. I researched treatments, consulted specialists, tried alternative therapies. Anything that might give us a fighting chance. The months that followed were a brutal cycle of hope and despair. For every good day, when Dad felt strong enough to sit in the garden or share a meal, there were 3 bad ones filled with pain and nausea from the treatments. One evening, as I was helping him back to bed after a particularly rough day, he turned to me with a serious look. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to promise me something." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Promise me you'll live your life. Really live it. Don't let this hold you back." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was going to be fine, but we both knew better. So instead, I squeezed his hand and said, "I promise, Dad." He died 2 weeks later. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, telling him how much I loved him, how grateful I was for everything he'd done for me. The next few days passed in a blur. I felt numb, going through the motions of arranging the funeral. There were so many details to handle: the casket, the flowers, the obituary. It all felt surreal, like I was planning an event for someone else. I was at the funeral home, trying to decide on music for the service, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello? Sarah? It's your mother. I nearly dropped the phone. After all these years of silence, she was calling now? What do you want? I asked, my voice cold. I heard about Mark, she said, her voice softer than I remembered. I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'd like to help. With the funeral arrangements, I mean. I wanted to hang up. To tell her to go to hell. But I was so tired, so overwhelmed. And a tiny part of me, a part one thought I'd buried long ago, yearned for a mother's comfort. Okay, I heard myself say. You can help. As I ended the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just opened a door I should have kept firmly shut. But with Dad gone, Mom was the only family I had left. Mom arrived at the funeral home an hour after our call, with my half-brother Thomas in tow. The kid was about 13 now, gangly and awkward. I watched as Mom fussed over him, straightening his tie, smoothing his hair. It was like a knife to the gut, seeing her shower Thomas with the affection I'd been denied my entire childhood. What do you need me to do? She asked. Despite my reservations, I put her to work. To my surprise, Mom turned out to be surprisingly helpful, managing the catering, arranging the flowers, dealing with the endless parade of well-wishers. The funeral itself was a blur. I remember standing there, numb, as people I barely knew came up to offer condolences. Linda stayed close, her hand occasionally touching my arm in what I suppose was meant to be a comforting gesture. It felt strange, this sudden maternal presence after years of neglect. After the service, as people were filing out of the cemetery, Linda approached me again. Sarah, I know this might not be the best time, but I'd like to stay in touch. Maybe we could get coffee sometime? I stared at her, this woman who had made my childhood a living hell, who had been thrilled to see me leave. But she was also the only family I had left. Maybe, I said finally. I'll think about it. To my surprise, Linda kept her word. In the weeks that followed, she called regularly, her voice always tinged with concern. How are you holding up, sweetie? She'd ask. Is there anything you need? At first, I was guarded, giving short, non-committal answers. But as the days wore on and the reality of Dad's absence set in, I found myself craving any kind of connection. Even if it was with Linda. Our conversation started simple enough. She'd ask about my job, my apartment, my friends. But gradually, her questions began to shift. Your father's business, she'd say casually. I hope it's not causing you too much stress. Mark always worked so hard. I'd deflect, changing the subject. The truth was, I was still trying to wrap my head around everything Dad had left me. The company, the real estate portfolio, it was overwhelming. And something in me, some instinct honed by years of Linda's manipulations, told me to keep quiet about it. As weeks turned into months, Linda's hints became less subtle. Thomas is looking at colleges, she mentioned during one call. The tuition these days, it's just astronomical. I don't know how we're going to manage it. I made a non-committal noise, my guard instantly up. Another time, it was, Richard's had some setbacks at work. The economy, you know. It's hitting everyone hard. Each conversation seemed to circle back to money, to the struggles they were facing. And each time, I could feel the unspoken expectation hanging in the air. Despite my initial reservations, Linda's persistent displays of maternal affection began to wear down my defenses. Against my better judgment, I started providing small amounts of financial assistance. It started innocently enough, helping Thomas with his SAT prep courses, buying Linda a new laptop when hers broke down, even covering a month's rent when Richard's company went through a rough patch. You're an angel, Sarah, Linda would gush. I don't know what we'd do without you. Each time, I felt a warmth in my chest. Was this what it felt like to have a real family? Meanwhile, I threw myself into running Dad's company. I made his longtime deputy the director, staying on as the owner and reserving the right to make all important decisions. It was challenging work, but I felt closer to Dad every time I sat in his old office. As the months passed, Linda's requests grew more frequent and more substantial. What started as occasional help turned into regular expectations. The breaking point came on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. I was knee-deep in quarterly reports when Linda called. "Sarah, darling," she began, her voice dripping with sweetness. "We've been thinking. It's been so long since we had a proper family vacation. We found this amazing package deal for a European tour." I felt my stomach drop. "Linda, I don't know." "It would mean so much to Thomas," she interrupted. "And after all we've been through, don't you think we deserve a little happiness?" Guilt warred with resentment in my chest. Before I knew it, I'd agreed to fund their trip. But it didn't stop there. The day after they returned, Linda was on the phone again. "Now, about Thomas's college fund," she said, her tone no longer sweet but demanding. "We'll need you to set that up right away. He's got his heart set on Princeton, you know." Something in me snapped. All the years of neglect, the emotional abuse, the manipulation, it all came rushing back. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "No more, Mom. I'm done." There was a pause, then Linda's voice came back, cold and hard. "After everything we've done for you? You ungrateful little scum. How dare you turn your back on your family?" I laughed, a bitter sound. "Family? You mean the mother who was thrilled to see me leave? The one who made my childhood a living hell?" The argument escalated quickly. Linda dropped all pretense of affection, hurling accusations and insults. I gave as good as I got, years of pent-up anger and hurt pouring out. "You're just like your father," she spat. "Selfish and cold-hearted." "Thank God for that," I shot back. "At least he loved me." The line went dead. I stood there, shaking, my phone clutched in my hand. The silence that followed was deafening. When the opportunity for a month-long business trip abroad came up, I jumped at it. A chance to get away, to clear my head. As I boarded the plane, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. Maybe this was what I needed, some time and distance to figure things out. After a month away, I was looking forward to the comfort of my own bed. The business trip had been successful but exhausting, and all I wanted was to kick off my shoes and relax in my apartment. But as I turned the key in the lock, something felt off. The door swung open to reveal a completely different apartment. Gone were my carefully chosen furnishings, replaced by unfamiliar decor. A startled couple stared at me from the couch. "Who are you?" I demanded, my heart racing. "What are you doing in my apartment?" The man stood up, looking confused. "Your apartment? We bought this place a couple of weeks ago. From a woman named Linda, I think?" The world tilted on its axis. "Linda. My mother. No, it couldn't be." "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice shaking. "I never sold this apartment. I've been out of the country." The couple exchanged worried glances. "We have all the paperwork," the woman said hesitantly. "Maybe you should talk to your realtor?" I stumbled out of the apartment, my mind reeling. My first instinct was to call the police, report a fraud. But a nagging voice in my head told me to confront Mom first. I needed to hear it from her. With trembling fingers, I dialed her number. It rang once, twice. "Hello, Sarah," Mom's voice was sickeningly sweet. "How was your trip?" "Cut the crap, Mom," I snarled. "What did you do to my apartment?" There was a pause, then to my shock, Linda laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "If you had just shared your wealth willingly, it wouldn't have come to this. You brought this on yourself, you know." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. You sold my apartment? How could you?" "I'll go to the police, You'll what?" Linda interrupted, her tone suddenly sharp. Report your own mother to the authorities? Please. We both know you don't have the spine for that. The call ended, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, homeless and in shock. But Linda's smug certainty had ignited a fire in me. Without thinking, I hailed a cab and gave the driver Linda and Richard's address. I pounded on the door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Richard answered, his face a mask of confusion. Sarah, what's going on? I pushed past him into the house. Where's Linda? I demanded. She's out, Richard said, still looking bewildered. Sarah, what's this about? In a rush, I told him everything, the apartment, Linda's confession, all of it. As I spoke, I watched the color drain from Richard's face. But, that's impossible, he stammered. We don't need money for Thomas's education. I've already set aside funds for that. We stared at each other, the truth dawning on us both. With shaking hands, Richard began pulling out financial statements, credit card bills. As we pored over them, a horrifying picture emerged. Mom secretly took out loans, and now she is mired in debt. I had no idea, Richard whispered, looking shell-shocked. All this time, I felt a strange mix of vindication and pity. Richard had been just as deceived as I had been. As the full extent of Linda's deception became clear, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was fraud, plain and simple. I didn't hesitate. The moment I hung up with the 911 operator, a weight lifted off my shoulders. For too long, I'd been Mom's victim. Not anymore. The investigation that followed was brutal but necessary. Every rock overturned revealed more of Linda's deceptions. She hadn't just forged my signature to sell my apartment, she'd been living a complete double life. Credit card statements revealed extravagant purchases, designer clothes, luxury spa treatments, 5-star hotels. All hidden from Richard, all financed through a web of lies and secret loans. The trial became a media circus. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, hungry for every sordid detail. I hated the attention, but part of me savored seeing Linda's carefully crafted image crumble in the public eye. In the end, justice prevailed. Mom was found guilty on all counts, fraud, forgery, the works. The judge's words still ring in my ears. Mrs. Linda Harrison, your actions show a blatant disregard for the law and a shocking betrayal of your family's trust. I sentence you to 3 years in prison, with an order to repay the full value of the fraudulently sold apartment to Sarah Harrison. Richard, bless him, was shell-shocked throughout the whole ordeal. The day after the sentencing, he called me. Sarah, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I'm filing for divorce. And I'm seeking full custody of Thomas. After what she's done, I can't let her near him. In the aftermath, I found myself rebuilding my life once again. The apartment money was returned, and I bought a small house on the outskirts of the city. A fresh start. I threw myself into running Dad's company, honoring his legacy the best way I knew how. The work was challenging, but rewarding. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly standing on my own 2 feet. Thomas and I keep in touch. He's in college now, studying engineering with Richard's support. It's bittersweet, but I'm glad we have a chance at some kind of relationship. As for Linda, I haven't heard from her since the trial. I don't know if she's tried to reach out, and honestly, I don't want to know. That chapter of my life is closed. I guess I should start at the beginning. I'm Camilla, and I was born to Jack and Lisa, my parents. Dad was always busy with his business stuff, and Mom was a teacher at the local elementary school. For the first 9 years of my life, things were pretty normal. We lived in a cozy house in the suburbs, had family dinners, went on vacations, you know, the usual stuff. Dad was always working on some new business idea. He'd come home late, his head full of plans and dreams. Mom was the calm one, always there with a hug or a kind word. She'd help me with my homework, bake cookies with me on weekends, and tell me stories before bed. But then, when I was 9, everything fell apart. It was a regular Tuesday evening. I was in my room, playing with my dolls, when I heard shouting from downstairs. It wasn't the normal kind of arguing, this was different, scary. I crept down the stairs, my heart pounding. I saw Mom and Dad in the living room. Dad's face was red, and he was waving his arms around. Mom was crying, mascara running down her cheeks. "How could you, Lisa?" Dad yelled. "With Mark? My God, he's been to our house for dinner." Mom was sobbing now. "I'm sorry, Jack, it just happened. I didn't mean for it to." "Didn't mean for it to what? To destroy our family?" Dad's voice cracked. The next few weeks were a blur. There were hushed phone calls, meetings with people in suits, and a lot of crying, from both Mom and Dad. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I knew it was bad. Then came the day Dad told me we were leaving. He knelt down in front of me, his eyes tired and sad. "Camilla, honey, you and I are going to be living somewhere else. We're leaving the house for your mom." "Why can't we stay here with Mom?" I asked, my lower lip trembling. Dad looked around the living room, his gaze lingering on the family photos. "It's complicated, sweetie. But we both love you very much. That will never change." As Dad and I drove away from our house, my stuffed animals and favorite books piled in the back seat, I felt like my whole world was crumbling. I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of a long, painful journey. Life with Dad turned out to be way different than I expected. At first, I thought we'd be struggling, you know? But Dad's business suddenly took off. Before I knew it, we were moving into this huge house, even bigger than our old one. It was weird, living somewhere so fancy when I still felt so messed up inside. Dad was working all the time. He'd leave before I woke up and come home after I was in bed. A lot of days, I'd end up at Grandma and Grandpa's house, that's Robert and Eleanor, Dad's parents. "Camilla, honey, come help me with these cookies," Grandma would say, trying to keep me busy. Grandpa would take me out to the garden, teaching me the names of all the plants. They were nice and all, but it wasn't the same as having my parents around. When Dad was home, he was different. Stricter, I guess. "Camilla, have you done your homework?" he'd ask as soon as he walked in the door. Or, "Camilla, your room's a mess. Clean it up before dinner." It was like he was trying to be both Mom and Dad, and not really managing either. But I gotta give it to him, he was trying. Every Sunday became what he called Daddy-Daughter Day. We'd go out and do stuff together, just the two of us. Mini golf was his favorite, he'd get so into it, acting all goofy and competitive. "Watch out, Camilla. I'm going for a hole-in-one," he'd shout, making me laugh despite myself. Sometimes we'd go get ice cream. I'd always get the triple chocolate fudge, and he'd pretend to be grossed out. "How can you eat that sugar bomb?" he'd ask, while secretly stealing spoonfuls when he thought I wasn't looking. Other times, we'd hit up the local museum. Dad would read every single plaque out loud, putting on different voices for each one. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, he'd say in this ridiculous pirate voice, making me giggle and the other visitors stare. When I turned 10, Dad signed me up for piano lessons. I wasn't too thrilled about it at first, but it turned out to be pretty cool. Dad would come to every recital, sitting in the front row with this big, goofy grin on his face. Even when I messed up, which was a lot, he'd be the first one on his feet, clapping like I'd just won a Grammy or something. But even with all that good stuff, I couldn't help missing Mom. Some nights, when Dad was working late, I'd pull out our old family photo albums. There was Mom, smiling in every picture. I'd trace her face with my finger, trying to remember what her laugh sounded like, or the smell of her perfume. Once a month, like clockwork, I'd get to see Mom. These court-ordered visits became the highlight of my calendar, circled in red and counted down to with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The first time I saw her after the split, it was awkward as hell. We just stood there, staring at each other like strangers. Then Mom burst into tears and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. After that, our visits became a whirlwind of activities and indulgence. It was like Mom was trying to cram a month's worth of mothering into a single day. She'd take me shopping, buying me clothes that made me feel grown up and cool. I remember trying on this crop top and thinking I was hot shit. "You look beautiful, sweetie," Mom gushed. When I wore it home, Dad nearly had a heart attack. "Absolutely not," he said, his face turning red. "Go change, now." I stomped up to my room, furious. "Mom lets me wear it," I muttered. "Well, I'm not your mother," Dad shot back. The next visit, Mom took me to this fancy cafe. The kind of place with tiny sandwiches and waiters in bow ties. "Order whatever you want, honey," Mom said with a wink. I went nuts. Chocolate cake, ice cream sundae, 3 different kinds of soda. By the end, I was so hyped up on sugar I was practically vibrating. Dad wasn't thrilled when I came home bouncing off the walls. "What did she feed you?" he grumbled, watching me zoom around the living room. But the best visit was when Mom surprised me with a trip to Adventureland, the local amusement park. We rode every roller coaster twice, screaming our heads off and laughing until our sides hurt. As we sat on a bench, sharing a massive cotton candy, Mom got this faraway look in her eyes. "Remember when we used to have family picnics in the backyard?" she said softly. "Your dad would burn the burgers, and we'd end up eating ice cream for dinner." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Those memories seemed like they belonged to someone else now. Mom squeezed my hand. "I miss those days, Camilla. I miss you. Maybe someday we could be a family again." My heart leapt at her words. "Really?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "We'll see, sweetie. We'll see." For weeks after, I'd daydream about moving back in with Mom, about our family being whole again. But then I'd look at Dad, see him trying so hard to make pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, and feel guilty for even thinking about leaving. Just before my 12th birthday, Mom dropped a bombshell. She was getting married to Mark. Yeah, that Mark, with whom she'd had an affair with. The wedding was like something out of a fairy tale. Mom looked stunning in her white gown, and Mark, well, he looked happy. I stood there in my frilly bridesmaid dress, watching them exchange vows, and felt torn in two. Part of me was happy for Mom. She was glowing, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years. But another part of me couldn't help thinking about Dad, alone in our big empty house, probably buried in work or binge-watching some crappy TV show. After Mom and Mark's wedding, things started to change. Our visits took on a new flavor. Mark was always there now, hovering in the background like an eager puppy. He'd ruffle my hair and say stuff like, "I always dreamed of having a daughter just like you, Camilla." It was nice, I guess. Weird, but nice. And the way Mom would beam at him when he said it, like he'd just handed her the moon or something, well, that made me feel good too. Like maybe this whole messed up situation could work out after all. Mom started talking more and more about me living with them. She'd go on and on about this room they were planning for me. "It'll have a window seat, Camilla," she'd say, her eyes sparkling. "Just like you always wanted. And we can paint it any color you like." I'd nod and smile, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. It felt like betraying Dad to even think about it. Our shopping sprees became less frequent. Instead, we'd have these big family dinners at their place. Mark would cook, he wasn't half bad, actually, and then regale us with stories about his work. Mom would hang on his every word, and I'd sit there, pushing food around my plate, feeling like a third wheel in my own family. When I turned 14, everything kicked into high gear. Mom started calling me every week, sometimes more. She'd show up at my school events unannounced, bringing me flowers or taking me out for ice cream after. "You know, Camilla," she'd say, stirring her coffee, "you're old enough now to decide where you want to live. The courts would listen to you." I'd freeze up every time she brought it up. Part of me wanted to jump at the chance, to go back to the way things were before. But another part wasn't so sure anymore. One day, she showed up at my debate club meeting. I was in the middle of arguing about climate change when I saw her slip into the back of the room. After it was over, she rushed up to me, beaming. "Oh, Camilla, you were wonderful," she gushed. "You know, if you lived with us, you could join the debate team at your new school. They're state champions." I felt my stomach clench. "Mom, just think about it, okay," she said, squeezing my arm. "We want you home with us." As I watched her leave, I felt torn in two. Home. What did that even mean anymore? That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about Mom and her new perfect life with Mark. I thought about Dad, working himself to the bone to give me everything I needed. I was 14 years old, and the weight of the world felt like it was on my shoulders. How was I supposed to choose? How could I possibly make a decision that wouldn't hurt someone I loved? My 15th birthday was coming up, and instead of being excited, I was dreading it. Mom and Dad were at each other's throats about who would host my party. It all came to a head at this family dinner at Dad's place. "She's been living with me for years, Lisa," Dad growled, stabbing his fork into his steak. "Of course I'm hosting her party." Mom's eyes flashed. "She's my daughter too, Jack. I have a right to celebrate her birthday." I just sat there, pushing my peas around my plate, wishing I could disappear. Then Mom dropped the bomb. "Camilla," she said, her voice suddenly soft, "you're old enough now to decide where you want to live. Who do you choose?" The room went dead silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, Mom's hopeful, Dad's hurt, Mark's expectant. My throat closed up. I couldn't breathe. "I want to live with Mom," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The look on Dad's face. God, I'll never forget it. It was like I'd reached into his chest and ripped out his heart. He just crumpled. Before I knew it, I was packing my bags. Mom and Mark were over the moon, helping me move my stuff into their place. Dad just stood in the doorway, watching, his eyes hollow. "You can come back anytime, Pumpkin," he said as I left. Anytime. The first few weeks at Mom and Mark's were like a dream. They took me shopping for my new room, letting me pick out this super expensive, trendy bedroom set. They enrolled me in this fancy private school, Westfield Academy. "You'll get a top-notch education here," Mom gushed. "This is the start of a bright future, Camilla." And the family game nights? They were a blast. We'd play Monopoly or Catan, laughing and trash-talking each other. For a while, I thought I'd made the right choice. But then, things started to change. It started small. Mom making comments about my clothes or my hair. "Honey, are you sure you want to wear that? It's not very flattering." Or, "Mark's niece always looks so put together. Maybe you could try styling your hair like hers?" Then it was my grades. I was struggling to keep up at Westfield. It was way harder than my old school. "A B-, Camilla?" Mom frowned, looking at my report card. "Mark's niece is top of her class. Maybe you're not applying yourself enough." The game nights became less frequent. More and more often, I'd come home to find a note on the fridge, "Gone out with the Petersons." Leftovers in the fridge. "Don't wait up." I'd heat up my dinner and eat alone in my room, staring at the fancy decor that suddenly felt cold and impersonal. The final straw was the vacation. They'd been promising me this amazing trip to Hawaii for months. I was so excited, counting down the days. Then, 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave, Mark sat me down. "Listen, kiddo," he said, not quite meeting my eyes, "we're going to have to postpone the trip. Just some financial stuff we need to sort out. You understand, right?" I nodded, forcing a smile. But inside, I felt something crack. That night, I lay in my fancy new bed, in my fancy new room, in this house that was supposed to be my home, and I cried. I cried for the life I'd left behind, for the dad who was probably sitting alone in his big empty house, for the little girl who thought she could have it all. The days leading up to the final custody hearing were tense. Mom was all smiles and reassurances, but I could feel the undercurrent of anxiety in the house. It was like walking on eggshells, everyone trying to pretend everything was perfect. I couldn't sleep. The pressure of the upcoming hearing, the growing unease I felt in this house, it all swirled in my head, keeping me awake night after night. It was about a week before the hearing when it happened. I woke up in the middle of the night, my throat dry as sandpaper. Figuring everyone was asleep, I crept downstairs for a glass of water. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Mom and Mark, having what sounded like a heated discussion. I froze, not wanting to interrupt. That's when I heard it. "I'm tired of pretending that I like having her here," Mark's voice, harsh and annoyed. "The kid is constantly draining our resources." My heart stopped. I pressed myself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. I know, Mom replied, her voice low and urgent. "But think about the tax breaks and the alimony. Once we have full custody, we'll have a steady income stream from Jack." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Mom was using me for money? Mark's voice again, skeptical. "I hope it's worth it. I didn't sign up to be a full-time dad to a teenager." "Just a little longer," Mom said, her voice soothing now. "Once she's officially ours, we can start setting some stricter rules. Maybe even send her to boarding school." I didn't wait to hear more. I bolted back upstairs, my need for water forgotten. I dove under my covers, shaking, tears streaming down my face. It had all been a lie. The shopping trips, the fancy school, the family game nights, it was all just a show. They didn't want me. They wanted Dad's money. I barely slept that night, replaying their words over and over in my head. When morning came, I dragged myself downstairs, feeling like a zombie. "Morning, sweetie," Mom chirped, way too cheerful. "Ready for breakfast?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I poked at my cereal, my stomach churning. "Everything okay, Camilla?" Mark asked, peering at me over his newspaper. "You look a little pale." I forced a smile. "Just nervous about a test," I lied. They exchanged a look. "Well, don't stress too much," Mom said, patting my hand. "I'm sure you'll do great." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, to tell them I knew everything, to demand how they could do this to me. But I didn't. I just sat there, nodding and smiling, playing the part of the perfect daughter. As soon as breakfast was over, I retreated to my room. I sat on my bed, staring at the fancy decor that now felt like a prison. What was I going to do? The hearing was in a week. If I didn't say anything, I'd be trapped here, with people who saw me as nothing more than a paycheck. The day of the custody hearing arrived like a thunderclap. The courtroom was packed. Mom and Mark sat on one side, both looking confident and put together. On the other side was Dad, with Grandma and Grandpa right behind him. Dad looked tired, resigned, like he'd already accepted defeat. As the lawyers droned on, presenting their arguments, I sat there in silence, my hands clenched so tight my knuckles were white. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, their expectations pressing down like a physical thing. Finally, the moment came. The judge, a stern-looking woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, turned to me. "Camilla," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle, "you're old enough now that your opinion matters in this decision. Who do you want to live with?" The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I could feel Mom's triumphant smile, could practically taste her victory. Dad just looked broken. Like he was bracing for the final blow. I stood up, my legs shaking so bad I thought I might fall over. I took a deep breath, and then, "I want to live with my father," I said, my voice trembling but growing stronger with each word. "And I don't want to see my mother anymore." The shock in the room was electric. Mom's smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. Mark's face went pale. Dad looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. The judge leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Camilla, that's a very serious statement. Can you tell us why?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "A week ago, I overheard a conversation between my mother and Mark. They said they were only fighting for custody because of the money. The alimony, the tax breaks. They talked about sending me to boarding school once they had custody. They don't really want me." As I spoke, I could see the color draining from Mom's face. Mark couldn't even look at me, his eyes fixed on the floor. "That's not true," Mom burst out, her voice shrill. "Camilla, honey, you must have misunderstood." "Mrs. Parker, please," the judge cut her off sharply. She turned back to me, her eyes kind but probing. "Camilla, are you absolutely sure about what you heard?" I nodded, feeling tears start to well up in my eyes. "Yes, Your Honor, I'm sure." The judge nodded slowly, then turned to address the courtroom. "In light of this new information, we'll need to take a brief recess. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. As everyone started to file out, I finally dared to look at Dad. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and something else. Hope, maybe? I wanted to run to him, to throw my arms around him and beg for forgiveness. But before I could move, a court officer was ushering me out of the room. The next 30 minutes felt like an eternity, but finally, we were called back into the courtroom. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The judge cleared her throat, and the room fell silent. In light of the new information provided by Camilla, and after careful consideration of all factors involved, I've reached a decision. Custody is awarded to the father, Jack Thompson. Furthermore, Lisa Parker will be required to pay child support. The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. I looked at Dad, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw him smile, really smile. As we left the courthouse, Mom grabbed my arm. Her face was twisted with anger and hurt. "I never loved you anyway," she hissed. "You're just as stupid as your father." Her words stung, but as I watched her storm off with Mark, I realized something: I was free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, the constant feeling of not being good enough. The next few years were, well, they weren't easy, but they were healing. Dad and I started going to family therapy together. At first, it was awkward and painful, dredging up all the hurt and misunderstandings between us. But slowly, session by session, we started to rebuild our relationship. We learned to communicate, to understand each other. Our bond grew stronger than I ever thought possible. Grandma and Grandpa became my rocks. They were always there with a warm hug, a home-cooked meal, or just a listening ear when I needed to talk. Their unwavering support helped me believe in family again. I threw myself into school and extracurriculars. I joined the debate team on a whim and discovered I had a knack for public speaking. Standing at the podium, articulating my thoughts, I felt powerful in a way I never had before. It was like I'd finally found my voice. On my 18th birthday, Dad surprised me with a gift that brought me to tears. It was a scrapbook, filled with photos and mementos from my childhood. There were pictures I thought were lost in the divorce: Mom and Dad and me at the beach, my first day of kindergarten, Christmases, and birthdays, and ordinary days that suddenly seemed precious. Now, at 20, I'm in college studying psychology. My experiences inspired me to want to help other kids going through divorce. I want them to know they're not alone, that it's not their fault, that they can survive and even thrive. I still have scars from what happened. There are days when the pain of Mom's betrayal feels fresh, when I wonder how she could have used me like that. But I'm learning to use that pain as fuel, to turn it into something positive. I've started speaking at conferences about children's rights in divorce proceedings. I tell my story, hoping it will make a difference. Maybe if one judge, one lawyer, one parent hears it and thinks twice about using a child as a pawn, it will all be worth it. Dad comes to every one of my speaking engagements. He sits in the front row, beaming with pride. Sometimes I catch him wiping away a tear when I talk about how far we've come. As for Mom, I haven't spoken to her since that day at the courthouse. Sometimes I think about reaching out, but I'm not ready. Maybe someday, but not yet. For now, I'm focused on healing, on building a future, on becoming the person I want to be. Life isn't perfect. I still have trust issues, still struggle with self-doubt sometimes. But I'm learning, growing, healing. And I'm surrounded by people who love me for who I am, not what I can do for them. My name's Amelia, and I was born with cerebral palsy. Now, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, growing up wasn't exactly a walk in the park. My parents? Well, let's just say they had a hard time wrapping their heads around having a kid like me. My brain works just fine, but my spine's got a mind of its own, and my left arm? It's a bit of a slacker. All this adds up to make me look a bit different from your average Joe, or Jane, in my case. I remember those early days, even though I was just a tiny thing. My mom, she couldn't even bring herself to hold me at first. It was like I was some kind of alien or something. Instead, I had this nanny taking care of me. She was nice enough, I guess, but it wasn't the same as having your mom there, you know? The nanny was my grandmother's idea. Grandma, now there's a woman who knew how to love. She didn't give a damn about how I looked or moved. To her, I was just her granddaughter, plain and simple. She was loaded, which came in handy more times than I can count. As I got older, things didn't exactly improve on the home front. Walking was a real pain in the ass, literally. I'd take a few steps, then bam. Faceplant on the floor. And my mom? She'd just stand there, watching me struggle. "You need to learn to get up on your own, Amelia," she'd say, not even trying to hide the disgust in her voice. But I wasn't stupid. I knew she just didn't want to touch me. It was like I had cooties or something. Things really took a turn when I hit the big 0 to 5. Mom got pregnant again, and 9 months later, out pops my little sister. Talk about a golden child. This kid was everything I wasn't: cute, bouncy, and most importantly to my mom, normal. From that day on, it was like I'd become invisible. Mom was all about her new baby girl. She'd spend hours taking selfies with her, posting them all over social media. "Look at my beautiful daughter," she'd write, and I'd think, what about me? Aren't I your daughter too? As I got older, things didn't exactly improve on the mobility front. Crutches became my constant companions, and on bad days, I'd roll around in a wheelchair. It wasn't ideal, but hey, you gotta work with what you've got, right? My mom would always come up with these excuses why I couldn't go out. "Oh, Amelia, it's not safe for you in other people's houses," she'd say. Or, "The shopping center isn't equipped for someone like you, sweetie." But I wasn't born yesterday. Even at that young age, I could see right through her bullshit. It wasn't about my safety or comfort, she was just embarrassed to be seen with me. God forbid her friends see her with her special daughter. So, my childhood became a never-ending cycle of 4 walls and a ceiling. While my sister got to experience the world, make friends, and create memories, I was stuck at home, watching life pass me by through the window. My parents didn't even try to hide the fact that they hated going anywhere with me. It was like I was some kind of burden they were forced to carry. When school time rolled around, you'd think things might change, right? Fat chance. Instead of sending me to a regular school where I might actually interact with kids my age, my parents insisted that Grandma foot the bill for a specialized school. "It's for the best, Amelia," Dad would say, not quite meeting my eyes. "You'll be with kids who understand you better." What he really meant was, "We don't want you embarrassing us at a normal school." But hey, who needs social skills and diverse experiences, am I right? So off I went, every day, driven by a nanny Grandma hired. Don't get me wrong, the nanny was nice enough, but it wasn't the same as having your mom or dad drop you off, you know? Now, Grandma, she was a whole different story. While my parents were busy pretending I didn't exist, Grandma was all about helping me thrive. "Amelia, my dear," she'd say, her eyes twinkling, "how about we take a little trip this weekend?" And just like that, I'd find myself on adventures I never thought possible. We'd visit museums, go to the park, even take short trips to nearby cities. For the first time in my life, I felt like a normal kid. Grandma didn't stop there, though. She was determined to give me every opportunity to improve. Massages, physical therapy, experimental treatments, you name it, she paid for it. "With the right care, there's nothing you can't do, Amelia," she'd tell me, her voice full of conviction. "You're going to have a wonderful life, full of friends and joy. You'll see." I remember this one time, after a particularly grueling therapy session, I was feeling pretty down on myself. Grandma noticed, of course, she always did. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, sitting down next to me. "Why bother with all this, Grandma?" I said, gesturing at my uncooperative body. "It's not like I'm ever going to be normal." She took my face in her hands, forcing me to look at her. "Amelia, listen to me. There's no such thing as normal. Everyone's got their own struggles, their own challenges. Yours are just a bit more visible, that's all. But that doesn't make you any less worthy of love, of friendship, of a full and happy life. You hear me? That was Grandma for you. Always ready with a hug, a word of encouragement, or a surprise treat. She believed in me when no one else did, not even myself. And slowly but surely, I started to believe too. It was Grandma's birthday, and she dropped a bombshell on us. She wanted to celebrate at a fancy restaurant. Now, for most families, this wouldn't be a big deal. But for us? It was like she'd suggested we all go skydiving. The next day, Mom came into my room with a forced smile. "Amelia, honey, Grandma's having a birthday dinner at a restaurant. But you're not feeling well, right? It's probably best if you stay home." I knew the drill. I was supposed to nod and agree, be the good, understanding daughter. But something in me snapped. "Actually, Mom, I feel fine. I'd love to go to Grandma's dinner." The color drained from her face. "Oh, but the restaurant might not be accessible. And you know how tired you get. It's really better if you stay home." Before I could argue, the doorbell rang. Mom's eyes widened in panic. "That's Grandma. Quick, get in bed and pretend you're sick." But it was too late. Grandma bustled in, took one look at me sitting up in my wheelchair, and smiled knowingly. "There's my girl. All ready for dinner, I see." Mom started sputtering some excuse about me being ill, but Grandma wasn't having it. She walked right up to me, put her hand on my head, and declared, "Doesn't feel like a fever to me. Come on, Amelia, let's get you to that restaurant." And just like that, we were all piling into Grandma's car, me in my wheelchair, my sister in her frilly new dress, and my parents looking like they were headed to a funeral instead of a birthday celebration. The restaurant was buzzing when we arrived. I saw relatives I hadn't seen in years, and to my surprise, they seemed genuinely happy to see me. As we settled in for dinner, I couldn't help but notice how Mom positioned herself as far from me as possible. She was chatting and laughing with everyone else, but it was like I didn't exist. I tried my best to eat neatly, I really did. But sometimes my hand just doesn't cooperate, you know? I saw Mom wince every time I dropped food or made a mess. Grandma, bless her heart, didn't miss a beat. She helped me when I needed it, chatted with me like I was the most interesting person at the table, and made sure I was comfortable. At one point, she called out Mom. "Susan, why aren't you helping Amelia with her meal?" Mom's face flushed red. She quickly scooped up my sister and plastered on a fake smile. "Oh, I can't manage both girls at once, Mom. You know how it is." I saw the flash of anger in Grandma's eyes, but before she could say anything, Dad stood up abruptly. "Well, this has been lovely, but I think it's time we headed home. Amelia looks tired." I wasn't tired. I was having the time of my life. But I knew better than to argue. As Dad wheeled me out, I caught sight of Grandma's face. She looked sad and disappointed, but she gave me a little wink. It was her way of saying, "Don't worry, I've got your back." As we drove home in silence, I couldn't help but think about the evening. Yeah, it had been awkward and uncomfortable at times. But for a few brief moments, I'd felt like part of a real family. And you know what? That feeling was worth all the awkwardness in the world. The feeling of awkwardness accompanied me all my childhood. Whenever we had visitors, the normal people my parents actually wanted to associate with, I'd get the same old song and dance. "Amelia," Mom would say, her voice sickly sweet, "why don't you go to your room for a bit? We're having company." At first, it stung. But over time I got used to it. So, I'd wheel myself into my room, shut the door, and wait. I'd hear the laughter, the chatter, the sounds of a normal family having a normal time. And I'd sit there, alone, trying not to feel like a freak in my own home. But you know what? I'm nothing if not adaptable. I taught myself to cook, even though my hands shook and I dropped more than a few plates along the way. I learned to draw, pouring my feelings onto paper when I couldn't express them out loud. And I wrote. Boy, did I write. Poems mostly, little snippets of emotion that I could never quite say out loud. The funny thing is, for a while there, I thought I had an ally in all this. My little sister, when she was just a tiny thing, she used to love me. Like, really love me. She'd toddle into my room, all big eyes and chubby cheeks, and just want to be near me. I remember this one time, she must have been about 3. She came into my room while I was drawing. "Mia," she squealed, she couldn't quite manage Amelia yet. "Draw me." So I did. It wasn't great, mind you, a wobbly circle for a head, stick arms, and legs. But to her? It was a masterpiece. She hugged that paper like it was made of gold. But then Mom walked in. The look on her face when she saw her precious baby girl cuddled up next to me? You'd think she'd caught her playing in mud. "Sarah," she snapped. "Come here, get away from your sister." Sarah looked confused. "But Mommy, Mia drawing me." Mom snatched the picture away. "That's nice, honey, but let's go play in your room instead, okay?" And just like that, it started. Every time Sarah tried to get close to me, Mom would pull her away. Like I was contagious or something. And over time? Well, Sarah learned. She stopped coming to my room, stopped asking me to play or draw for her. By the time she hit her teens, she was just like Mom. I'd hear her giggling with her friends in the living room, but I knew better than to go out there. One day, I wheeled myself out to get a glass of water, forgetting she had friends over. The look of horror on her face when she saw me? It was like looking at a mini version of Mom. "Amelia," she hissed. "Go back to your room. My friends are here." And just like that, I was back in my sanctuary, my prison, my room. But you know what? It didn't hurt as much as it used to. Because in that room, I wasn't Amelia the freak, Amelia the embarrassment. I was just Amelia. The girl who could cook a mean omelet, draw pictures that made people smile, even if those people were just me and Grandma, and write poems that captured all the things I couldn't say out loud. Meanwhile, life went on, and graduation came. Man, what a mix of emotions that was. There I was, surrounded by my classmates, other special kids like me. And you know what? For once, I felt normal. We were all different in our own ways, but here, in this moment, we were the same. Kids who'd made it despite the odds. I remember looking around at all the smiling faces, the proud parents, the teary-eyed teachers. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself feel proud too. I'd done it. Despite everything, I'd actually done it. But then reality came crashing back. My eyes scanned the crowd, searching for familiar faces. Mom, Dad, Sarah? Nope, nope, and nope. They were probably sipping cocktails on some beach right about now, enjoying their much-needed family vacation. Funny how their idea of family never seemed to include me. But you know who was there? Grandma. Front and center, beaming like I'd just won the Nobel Prize or something. When they called my name, I swear her cheers were loud enough to shake the rafters. Fast forward a few months, and suddenly the house was buzzing with excitement. Mom and Dad's 20th wedding anniversary was coming up, and they'd decided to go all out. They were making a whole damn movie about their happy family life. I remember thinking, well, this should be interesting. For 2 weeks straight, it was like living in some bizarre reality show. We were dragged from location to location, the local entertainment center, some picturesque nature spot, even a yacht. Where'd they even get a yacht? We'd change clothes more times than I could count, pose for endless photos, record cheesy congratulations, and even sing songs. It was exhausting, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't also kind of fun. For once, I was included. Sure, Mom would fuss about how to position my wheelchair so it looked natural, and Dad would get this pinched look on his face whenever the photographer had to take extra time to get me in the shot. But I was there. I was part of it. I even wrote a special poem for Mom and Dad. Spent weeks on it, actually. Agonized over every word, practicing in front of my mirror until I could recite it without stumbling. When it came time to record it, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Mom, Dad, I started, my voice shaky but determined. 20 years of love and life, of joy and strife. Through all the ups and downs, you've stood strong, a testament to love's enduring song. I kept going, pouring my heart out in verse. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. I looked up, half expecting to see tears in their eyes or something. Instead, Mom was fussing with Sarah's hair, and Dad was checking his watch. That was nice, Amelia, Mom said, not quite meeting my eyes. Very creative. Now, let's get Sarah set up for her piano piece, shall we? And just like that, my moment was over. But you know what? I didn't let it get me down. Because for those 2 weeks, I'd been part of something. I'd contributed. And even if they couldn't appreciate it, I knew I'd done something special. The big day was approaching fast. The director had been working his magic, weaving together our new footage with clips from the family archives. I was buzzing with excitement, eager to see how it all came together. When the finished product arrived, I wheeled myself into the living room, ready for the grand unveiling. But Mom quickly intercepted me. "Oh, Amelia," she said, that fake sweetness coating her words like cheap syrup, "we're saving it for the party. You'll see it with everyone else. It'll be more special that way." Finally, the day of the anniversary party arrived. Grandma's place was decked out like something out of a movie itself. Her sprawling lawn had been transformed into an outdoor cinema, with plush pillows scattered across the grass for seating. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over everything, guests started to arrive. "All right, everyone," Dad called out, clinking his glass for attention. "If you'd all like to take a seat, we're about to start the show." There was a flurry of movement as people settled onto the pillows. I stayed in my wheelchair, parked next to Grandma. She gave my hand a squeeze as the movie began to play. The opening shot was of Mom and Dad on their wedding day. They looked so young, so happy. Mom's dress was beautiful, and Dad couldn't take his eyes off her. I felt a lump form in my throat. Then came a montage of their early years together. Vacations, parties, lazy Sundays at home. They looked so in love, so carefree. I searched each frame, waiting for my entrance. But as the timeline of their lives unfolded on the screen, a sinking feeling began to grow in my stomach. There were shots of them with friends, with colleagues, with other family members. But I was nowhere to be seen. Then came footage of Mom's pregnancy, and my heart leapt. This is it, I thought. This is where I come in. But no. The next shot was of Sarah as a newborn, Mom cradling her with a look of pure adoration. Dad hovering proudly nearby. The movie continued, showing Sarah growing up. Her first steps, first day of school, dance recitals, family vacations. It was like watching a parallel universe where I didn't exist. Then came the footage from our recent shoots. I held my breath, waiting to see myself on screen. There was our family, singing and dancing, looking like the picture-perfect unit. But I wasn't there. It was as if I'd been erased, cut out of every frame. As the reality of what I was seeing sank in, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't some mistake or oversight. This was deliberate. They'd erased me. My own family had wiped me from their history. Grandma took one look at my face and something in her snapped. She marched over to the projector and shut it off. The lawn was plunged into an awkward silence. Susan, David, Grandma's voice, cut through the night air like a knife. What the hell is this? The guests started murmuring uncomfortably. Dad stepped forward, trying to calm things down. Now, Mom, let's not make a scene. But Grandma was just getting started. Make a scene? You want to talk about making a scene? How about erasing your child from your family history? That's one hell of a scene if you ask me. Mom's face had gone pale. It's not like that, she stammered. The photographer said Amelia wasn't photogenic. We were just trying to put our best foot forward. Grandma let out a harsh laugh. Oh, that's rich, Susan. Shall we talk about how you wanted to abandon her the day she was born? How I had to promise financial support just to get you to keep your own child. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I felt like I was going to be sick. I've supported this family for years, Grandma continued. Paid for your vacations, your luxuries. All I asked was that you love your daughter. And you couldn't even do that. Suddenly, Sarah jumped up. Shut up, she screamed. Just shut up. Amelia's a cripple. She's embarrassing. I didn't want her in the video either. The silence that followed was deafening. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own sister. Grandma turned to my parents, her voice cold. Well done. You've raised one daughter to be just as intolerant as you are. Then she dropped the bombshell. You know what? I'm done. Amelia is now my sole heir. Every penny I have will go to her. Mom exploded. Are you insane? What does she need money for? She needs a full-time nurse, not a fortune. Get out, Grandma said quietly. When they didn't move, she repeated it louder. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. I'm done supporting your comfortable little existence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mom laughed nervously. Come on, Mom. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life, Grandma cut her off. Leave. Now. And don't come back. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. My parents and Sarah, looking shell-shocked, gathered their things and left. Grandma slammed the door behind them with a finality that echoed across the lawn. As the dust settled, I became aware of movement around me. The guests, who had witnessed this whole ugly scene, were approaching me one by one. Aunt Karen hugged me tightly. Uncle Jim patted my shoulder awkwardly but sincerely. Even some of my parents' friends, people who had never so much as looked at me before, came up to express their support. So, there I was, suddenly living in Grandma's big house. Talk about a plot twist, right? It was like stepping into a whole new world, one where I wasn't a dirty little secret to be hidden away, but a person worthy of love and respect. About a week after the great family meltdown, that's what I started calling it in my head, Grandma sat me down for a chat. All right, Amelia, she said, that familiar twinkle in her eye. Let's talk about your future. What do you want to do with your life? I blinked at her, caught off guard. No one had ever really asked me that before. It was always assumed I'd just exist, I guess. Be taken care of. But never have dreams of my own. I don't know, I stammered. I never thought. Well, start thinking, Grandma said, not unkindly. The world's your oyster now, kiddo. What do you love doing? And just like that, it hit me. I love writing, I said, my voice growing stronger. And drawing. I want to create things, Grandma. Beautiful things. Grandma's face lit up like a Christmas tree. Well, why didn't you say so? We'll get you into the best damn art and literature program we can find. Before I knew it, I was enrolled in the literature department of a nearby college. Grandma had made sure the campus was fully accessible, and even hired a part-time assistant to help me with any physical tasks I couldn't manage. That first day of college, I was terrified. I kept waiting for the stares, the whispers, the pitying looks I'd grown so accustomed to. But they never came. Sure, people noticed my wheelchair, but it was with curiosity rather than judgment. And once they got to know me, the real me, not the shadow I'd been for so long, the wheelchair became just another part of who I was, not my defining feature. I threw myself into my studies with a passion I never knew I had. Literature opened up whole new worlds to me, and my professors encouraged me to explore my own voice through poetry. My art classes taught me new techniques, ways to express on paper the thoughts and feelings I'd kept bottled up for so long. And you know what? Turns out, I wasn't half bad at this stuff. My poems started winning competitions, my artwork was featured in student exhibitions. For the first time in my life, I was being seen for my abilities, not my disabilities. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. There were days when the pain, both physical and emotional, felt overwhelming. Days when I missed my parents and sister, despite everything. But I had Grandma, and I had my art, and slowly but surely, I was building a life for myself. Now, here I am, holding my very first published book of poetry in my hands. It's a slim volume, nothing fancy, but it's mine. Every word, every illustration, they all came from me. From my experiences, my pain, my joy, my growth. As I flip through the pages, I can't help but smile at the dedication. To Grandma, who taught me that being different isn't a flaw, it's a feature. And to everyone who's ever felt invisible, may you find the strength to make yourself seen. I'm Anna, the afterthought in a family of geniuses. My parents, both big shots at the university, had their lives all mapped out. Then I showed up, uninvited and unexpected. We found out too late, Mom would often say, her voice thick with regret. By the time we knew, it was already too late for other options. My sister Sarah and I were born just 11 months apart. We looked like twins, but that's where the similarities ended. She was the brain, I was the heart. From day one, it was clear who the favorite was. Look, John. Sarah's reading already, Mom exclaimed one day when I was about 3. Sarah sat in the corner, nose buried in a book meant for kids twice her age. That pretty much set the tone for our childhood. Sarah devoured books, I devoured life. She memorized complex texts, I struggled to remember what I had for breakfast. I was diligent, hardworking. But no matter how hard I worked, it never seemed to be enough. Anna, Mom said one day, exasperation clear in her voice, how many times do I have to explain this? It's simple addition. I stared at the numbers, willing them to make sense. But they danced across the page, mocking me. Meanwhile, Sarah breezed through her advanced math homework in the next room. But where I lacked in academics, I made up for in personality. I was the class clown, the life of the party. My laughter was infectious, to everyone except my parents. One evening at dinner, I was telling a joke I'd heard at school. And then the chicken said, Anna, Mom's sharp voice cut through my story. Enough. Laughing for no reason is a sign of low intelligence. Please control yourself. I felt my cheeks burn with shame. Across the table, Sarah smirked, her eyes never leaving her book on quantum physics. As elementary school progressed, the divide only deepened. Sarah collected academic awards like they were going out of style. Me? I was lucky if I got a gold star for attendance. I'll never forget the day of the school science fair in 5th grade. Sarah's project on cellular mitosis won first place. Mine, well, let's just say my baking soda volcano didn't exactly erupt as planned. As we drove home, the car filled with praise for Sarah's achievement. I sat in the back, covered in dried baking soda, feeling smaller by the minute. "Well," Dad finally said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror, "I suppose not everyone in the family can be scientifically inclined." Mom nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's clear Anna doesn't have the aptitude for it. What will our colleagues think?" I sank lower in my seat, wishing I could disappear. That was the moment I realized I'd never be able to maintain their precious status in the scientific community. In their eyes, I was the disappointment, the one who couldn't carry on their legacy. As we got older, the gap between Sarah and me only widened. Sarah was whisked off to science camps, math competitions, and academic decathlons. Me? I was left with our elderly babysitter, Mrs. Jenkins. But you know what? Mrs. Jenkins was a godsend. While my parents were grooming Sarah to be the next Einstein, Mrs. Jenkins was teaching me skills that would serve me well in the real world. "Come on, Anna," she'd say, her wrinkled hands guiding mine as we kneaded dough. "Let me show you how to make a pie that'll knock their socks off." Other days, we'd clip coupons and plan grocery lists. "Listen here, girl," she'd say, her eyes twinkling. "Knowing how to stretch $1 is just as important as knowing how to split an atom." But the best lessons came during our heart-to-heart talks. "Anna, sweetie," she said one day as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Not everyone's born a genius, but everyone can make the world a little better. You remember that." Those words became my lifeline in a house where I never seemed to measure up. At school, Sarah continued to shine. She participated in every academic competition, bringing home trophies and medals that Mom would display proudly in the living room. My report cards, on the other hand, were hidden away in a drawer, never to see the light of day. High school was a struggle. While Sarah breezed through AP classes and SAT prep, I was just trying to keep my head above water. Math was my nemesis, and no matter how hard I tried, the numbers just wouldn't cooperate. The day we got our SAT scores was the final straw. Sarah, of course, had aced it. Me? Let's just say, my score wouldn't be getting me into any colleges. "A dumbass, that's what you are," Dad yelled, waving my score report in my face. "How can you be so stupid? It's simple addition, for God's sake." Mom stood by, shaking her head in disgust. "And Sarah?" She leaned against the doorframe, a smug smile playing on her lips. Not once did she step in to defend me. Not once did she offer to help. She just watched, probably thinking how lucky she was to be the smart one. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, as my parents continued their tirade. "You can't even add 2 plus 2. How do you expect to get into college? To make something of yourself?" Their words cut deep, each one a reminder of how I'd never be good enough. But somewhere in the midst of their shouting, I felt something else stirring. Anger, determination. A fierce desire to prove them wrong. As I lay in bed that night, their harsh words still ringing in my ears, I made a decision. I might not be cut out for college, at least not right now. But that didn't mean I couldn't make something of myself. The day after graduation, I marched into Sunny's supermarket and got myself a job as a cashier. It wasn't glamorous, but you know what? For the first time in my life, I had something that was all my own. Within weeks, I was pulling in my own paychecks. I told my parents I'd found a job, but they barely looked up from their papers. They didn't ask where or what I was doing, and honestly, I was relieved. At least this way, they couldn't disapprove. I was still living at home, but now I had my own money. It wasn't much, but it was enough to have a little fun without having to beg my parents for cash. "Anna, you coming to the beach this weekend?" My friend and co-worker from the store Lisa would call, and I'd grin, knowing I could say yes without worrying about the cost. While Sarah spent her summer buried in textbooks, preparing for her first semester at some fancy Ivy League school, I was living it up. Weekends at the beach, movie nights with friends, impromptu road trips, I was finally free to be me. Weeks turned into months, and I settled into my new life. Sure, it wasn't the life my parents had envisioned for me, but I was happy. Really happy. Then came that day. The day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the store was quiet, and I was restocking the gum display when I heard the automatic doors swish open. I looked up, my customary greeting on my lips, and froze. There, looking as prim and proper as ever, was my mother. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I saw the shock in her eyes, followed quickly by embarrassment. She turned, clearly intending to leave without a word. But some part of me, some naive, hopeful part, called out, "Mom, hey." She turned slowly, her face a mask of disdain. "Anna," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment, "what are you doing here?" I gestured to my name tag, trying to keep my voice light. "I work here. Have been for a few months now." Her eyes narrowed. "A saleswoman? Really, Anna? The daughter of a professor, reduced to this?" She waved her hand dismissively at the store around us. "What will our colleagues think if they find out my daughter is the lowest rung on the social ladder?" Her words hit me like a slap. I'd been proud of my independence, of earning my own way. But in her eyes, I was just an embarrassment. "I'm working honestly," I managed to say, my voice small. "I'm not doing anything wrong." But Mom was beyond reason. Her voice rose, drawing the attention of the few customers in the store. "You will quit this job immediately, do you hear me? I will not have you embarrassing our family like this. And you can forget about living under our roof if this is the path you choose." I stood there, rooted to the spot, as she stormed out of the store. The automatic doors swished closed behind her, leaving a deafening silence in her wake. That night, I returned home with a heavy heart and tear-stained cheeks. The house was quiet, but the silence felt oppressive. Without a word, I went to my room and started packing. As I was zipping up my last suitcase, Mom appeared in the doorway. Instead of the concern I'd foolishly hoped for, her face showed only relief. "So, you finally decided to leave," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Good, it's for the best." Dad appeared behind her, nodding in agreement. "Remember to change your surname," he added. "We can't have you disgracing our family name with your choices." Their words stung, but I was beyond tears now. "Fine," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'll take Grandpa's name. At least he knew how to love unconditionally." I grabbed my bags and walked out, not looking back. They didn't ask for my new address, and I didn't offer it. The next day, I moved in with Lisa. We'd become fast friends over the past few months, and when I told her what happened, she didn't hesitate to offer me her spare room. One lazy Sunday afternoon, as Lisa and I were scrolling through social media, I came across Sarah's profile. My finger hesitated over the unfollow button, but curiosity got the better of me. Sarah's feed was a parade of achievements. Photos of her receiving awards, status updates about her latest research breakthroughs, announcements of her admission to elite scientific societies. Each post had hundreds of likes and comments, all singing her praises. "Your sister?" Lisa asked, peering over my shoulder. "Have you talked to her recently?" I shook my head, remembering our last interaction. It was a few weeks after I'd left home. In a moment of weakness, I'd reached out to Sarah, suggesting we meet for coffee. Her response was cold and dismissive. "Anna, I'm afraid we don't have much in common anymore. Our interests and, frankly, our levels of development are quite different now. I don't think meeting would be productive for either of us." That was the last time we communicated directly. Despite the rift with my immediate family, I stayed in touch with my extended relatives. Aunt Martha, in particular, became a source of comfort and connection to my roots. During one of our regular phone calls, she let slip some information that simultaneously hurt and validated my decision to leave. "Oh, Anna," she sighed, her voice heavy with sadness. "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but Your parents, they always ask if you'll be at family gatherings. If we say yes, they refuse to come. They say it's because you're beneath their status now, and they can't bear to be in the same room as you. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, but it was duller now. It's okay, Aunt Martha, I said, surprised by how much I meant it. I'm happy with my life now. If they can't accept that, it's their loss. And it was true. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had a job I enjoyed, friends who accepted me for who I was, and a growing sense of self-worth that had nothing to do with academic achievements or social status. 5 years had passed since I'd walked out of my parents' house, and life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. I'd been promoted to assistant manager at the store, my circle of friends had grown, and I'd even started taking some online classes in business management. I was content, but something was missing. That all changed on a balmy summer evening. My friends had organized a beach bonfire, and I noticed him. He was standing a little apart from the group, looking slightly out of place in his button-down shirt and khakis. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. They seemed to sparkle with curiosity as he took in the scene around him. I made my way over, extending my hand. Hi, I'm Anna. You look like you could use a S more. He laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made me smile. I'm David. And yes, I could definitely use a S more. It's been years since I've had one. As we roasted marshmallows, we got to talking. Turns out, David was an environmental scientist, fresh off a research expedition in the Amazon. We talked for hours that night, about everything and nothing. David was fascinated by my stories of customer service adventures, and I was enthralled by his passion for the environment. As the weeks turned into months, David and I grew closer. He didn't care that I hadn't gone to college or that I worked as a saleswoman. He loved my quick wit, my ability to make friends with anyone, and what he called my refreshing perspective on life. I met his family at a dinner party 6 months into our relationship. I was nervous, after all, they were all accomplished scientists. But to my surprise, they welcomed me with open arms. Throughout the evening, they asked about my job, my interests, my dreams. Not once did they ask about my education or my family background. It was refreshing. A year to the day after we met, David proposed. It was nothing grand, just the two of us, on the same beach where we'd first talked. But it was perfect. We planned a small wedding, just close friends and family. As I addressed the invitations, I hesitated over 3 names, Mom, Dad, and Sarah. Despite everything, a part of me still hoped. But the RSVPs came back, and those 3 remained silent. Life with David was everything I'd ever dreamed of and more. We'd settled into a cozy routine, balancing his research work with my job at the store. But as content as I was, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant for something more. That something more came on a lazy Sunday afternoon at David's parents' house. We were all lounging in the backyard, enjoying the warm sunshine and cold lemonade, when the conversation turned to David's latest research. The amount of plastic waste we're producing is staggering, David sighed, running a hand through his hair. And the worst part is, most of it ends up in landfills or the ocean. His father nodded gravely. It's a crisis, no doubt about it. But what can we do? People aren't going to stop using plastic overnight. As they continued discussing the problem, an idea started forming in my mind. Years of working retail had taught me a thing or two about what people want and need. And all those hours I'd spent with Mrs. Jenkins, learning to be resourceful and creative, suddenly came rushing back. Before I knew it, I was grabbing a napkin and a pen from the table. What if, I started, my voice trembling with excitement, what if we could turn that plastic waste into something useful? Something people actually want? 3 pairs of eyes turned to me, curious. Encouraged, I continued, sketching rapidly on the napkin. Like this, I said, holding up my crude drawing. Garden furniture made entirely from recycled plastic. Durable, weather-resistant, and eco-friendly. We could even make it modular, so people can customize their own designs. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, I feared I'd overstepped, that they'd laugh at my silly idea. But then, Anna, David's father said slowly, his eyes wide with amazement, that's brilliant. David was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Do you know how many environmental problems this could solve? And the market potential, it's enormous. His mother chimed in, and it's not just garden furniture. Think of all the urban applications, park benches, playground equipment, even building materials. What happened next was a whirlwind. David's parents, excited by the potential of the idea, offered to invest in making it a reality. Before I knew it, we were setting up a company, with me, Anna Holloway, former family disappointment, as the CEO. David, with his scientific background, took charge of developing the technology to recycle and mold the plastic efficiently. I focused on design and marketing, drawing on my years of customer service experience to create products people would love. 6 months after that fateful Sunday afternoon, we launched our first line of garden furniture. The response was overwhelming. People loved the sleek designs, the eco-friendly concept, and the story behind it all. Encouraged by our success, we expanded our range. Urban planners started reaching out, interested in using our recycled plastic products for city projects. And then, the call that changed everything, the mayor's office wanted to meet with us. We met and signed a contract for the improvement of the city. 3 years had passed since that fateful day in David's parents' backyard. Our company, EcoRenew, had grown beyond our wildest dreams. We'd recycled tons of plastic waste, transformed city parks, and even started branching out into eco-friendly building materials. And now, here we were, about to receive a state award for innovation and environmental impact. As David and I stood in the grand ballroom, surrounded by the crème de la crème of the scientific and business world, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. We made our way through the crowd, stopping to chat with various dignitaries and fellow innovators. I was in the middle of a conversation with the city's head of urban development when I saw them. My parents and Sarah, standing near the refreshment table. They looked different. Mom and Dad had aged considerably, their hair more gray than I remembered. And Sarah, always so put together, looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. For a moment, our eyes met across the room. I saw the shock register on their faces, clearly not expecting to see me in such a setting. I turned to David, linking my arm through his. "Let's go find your parents," I said, perhaps a bit louder than necessary. As we walked past my family, I kept my eyes forward, chin held high. We found David's parents near the stage, beaming with pride. As we chatted about the upcoming ceremony, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. My mother was approaching, her eyes fixed on David's mom. "Excuse me," I heard her say, her voice sickly sweet. "I couldn't help but notice your lovely family. You must be so proud of your son and his wife?" I tensed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But my mother-in-law just smiled warmly. "Oh, we are. Anna is a remarkable woman. We're lucky to have her in our family." As she walked back to my father and Sarah, I could see them huddling together, whispering furiously. I caught snippets of their conversation. "Can't believe it's her. Married into a family of scientists. Probably just here as his plus one." The moment had finally arrived. As the presenter called my name, announcing EcoRenew as the recipient of the State Environmental Innovation Award, I felt a surge of pride. I walked onto the stage, my heart pounding with excitement. As I reached for the microphone, ready to deliver the speech I'd carefully prepared, chaos erupted. My mother rushed onto the stage. Before I could react, she had grabbed my arm and snatched the microphone from my hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice quavering with emotion, "I am the proud mother of this brilliant, worthy woman." She gestured dramatically towards me. "We always knew Anna would become someone extraordinary." I stood there, frozen in disbelief, as she continued her performance, even managing to squeeze out a few tears. The audience, recognizing the famous Professor Anderson, broke into applause. In that moment, rage and hurt bubbled up inside me, years of neglect, disappointment, and rejection crystallizing into a single, burning point of resolve. I would not let her steal this moment. I gently but firmly took the microphone back from her. "Thank you, Mother," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "If I could have a moment of silence, please." The room hushed, all eyes on me. "Yes, I am the daughter of the renowned Professors Anderson," I began, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "But I stand before you today not because of them, but despite them." I saw shock ripple through the audience, my mother's face paling beside me. I recounted the years of missed school events, of being told I was an embarrassment, of being asked to change my name and move out. I worked as a saleswoman, hiding my identity, because my own parents were ashamed of me. The room was dead silent, hanging on every word. But today, I stand before you not as a failure, but as a success. Not because of my family name, but because of the family I chose. I looked towards David and his parents, seeing tears in their eyes. My husband, David, and his wonderful parents saw potential in me when no one else did. They encouraged my ideas, supported my dreams. It's thanks to them that EcoRenew exists, that we've been able to make a difference in our environment and our community. I gestured for David to join me on stage. As he walked up, I saw my father and Sarah slip out of the hall, unable to bear the scrutiny of the crowd. "This award," I continued, holding up the plaque, "is a testament to what can happen when you believe in someone, when you nurture their potential instead of crushing their spirit. It's proof that intelligence comes in many forms, and that kindness and support can change lives." I turned to my mother, still standing shell-shocked beside me. "I'm sorry, but I can't accept your sudden pride in me. You lost that right years ago." "My real family is here," I said, putting my arm around David. The hall erupted in applause, people rising to their feet. I saw tears, heard whispers of admiration and support. David's parents were openly crying, beaming with pride. In the days that followed, I heard through the grapevine that my parents and Sarah were facing backlash in their academic circles. People were shocked by their treatment of me, and many were reconsidering their associations with them. Part of me felt guilty for exposing them, for complicating their lives, as they put it. But a stronger part knew that I had done nothing wrong. I had simply told the truth, a truth that had been silenced for far too long. As for me, life went on. EcoRenew continued to grow and innovate. David and I started talking about starting a family of our own. And every day, I woke up grateful for the life I had built, for the family I had chosen, and for the strength I had found within myself.